Coinbase just revealed that multiple sovereign wealth funds are buying Bitcoin and at an unprecedented rate through their ETFs. But that doesn't stop there. The ETF volumes have been through the roof in April, pointing to all big players coming in hot. But I'm going to dive into much more of that today and how this could be the potential of a massive paper Bitcoin attack. If you guys have been tuning in, you know I've been talking about this for a while with Coinbase. So let's listen to this clip from Coinbase Money Manager as to these sovereign wealth funds coming in.
We've been buying during April. Sovereign wealth funds, large institutional, long-term duration pools of capital. They're looking at it basically three ways. One is if you think about the tariff announcement April 2nd, if you believe that that's going to have a spillover effect on global trade, you believe there's going to be less global trade, then much of which is denominated in US dollars, then you think there'll be lower demand for US dollars that we refer to as de-dollarization. Well, some of the ways Bitcoin is used by these large pools of capital is they buy it in their local fiat currency, they hold it, and they sell it into dollars when they need it. Right. Well, if you think dollar is going to weaken, then you don't do that anymore. And
so it looks like sovereign wealth funds are shorting the dollar with Bitcoin. Who would have thought that we're at this place in the cycle with sovereign wealth funds looking at Bitcoin as a potential out? But I think there's much more to this story than meets the eye, right? First, it's sovereign wealth funds. Okay. Giant institutions buying Bitcoin. They mention insurance companies, other nation states. But the big driver of all of this is they're doing it through their ETFs. Now, we've had BlackRock and Larry Fink already come out and say, hey, we think Coinbase needs to be audited. There is some issues here, right? With everything. There's some issues with all that. We saw BlackRock diversify earlier by moving some of their holdings from not only Coinbase, but to others, potentially looking at ways to get away from Coinbase. So what does Coinbase know with all of this? But first, before we dive into more of that, let's hear what else he had to say that I think was pretty interesting as far as the ETF flows that Coinbase is noticing.
Gold ETF inflows were massive, like $8.5 billion roughly from the 2nd through the 22nd. Okay. Might surprise you to learn that Bitcoin ETF flows were net negative to the tune of about 470 million. So the opposite of that was occurring. So institutions, sovereigns, patient pools of capital were piling in during April, which resulted in about a 13% increase in Bitcoin versus 10.5 for gold. And retail via the ETF were exiting. So you got to kind of ask yourself, what do the institutions know?
Were the institutions buying?
Yeah, did you hear that? What do the institutions know with all of this going on? The institutions were piling in while retail was piling out of Bitcoin, right? So sovereign wealth funds were piling in as retail was exiting. Plain and simple. Headline right here. I'm not clickbaiting that. I'm telling you guys exactly what this headline is stating here, right? So, John, I'm not even going to D'Agostino. Look at that, man. The kid, you can't make that up. That's some skill right there. The head of Coinbase Institutional compared Bitcoin to gold and said many traders view it as an inflationary hedge. Look, I listened to that whole clip there and a bunch of that interview. He essentially said that an inflation hedge, it's tough to come by. Nothing is perfect, but he said retail investors and investors alike are all looking at it very similarly, right? It has very similar core characteristics: scarcity, immutability, non-sovereign. They even went into potentially carrying it over. But let's dive into all of this because there's more to unpack with this story. Not only Coinbase's paper attack, but who could they possibly be talking about when it comes to these sovereign wealth funds? Because these are big money players, right? So we're looking at Mubadala Sovereign Wealth Fund investing $437 million in Bitcoin in February. Well, it's got to be something here, right? You got to think it's operating in Abu Dhabi. Well, as you guys know and love, I've shown this here a few times. Look at how big this Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund is. You know, we got the UAE, Kuwait, we've got Saudi Arabia, we've got some of these big players already invested in Bitcoin. And so all of these guys, all of these big name players are looking at Bitcoin as a viable option. So they're looking at the Trump tariff war. So the Trump tariff war is now causing these sovereign wealth funds to short the dollar by buying Bitcoin. But in reality, they could be being fooled with all of this because Coinbase is selling them paper Bitcoin. We'll get into all of that later. But still, either way, we're seeing the largest sovereign wealth funds now starting to buy into Bitcoin and really take it a step further here, right? So Bitcoin is the fund's second largest investment by quite a bit margin. The next largest holding is the ARM, worth $182 million. It's absolutely insane. It represents just 2% of its total value. So the fund's largest investment is the semiconductor firm, but outside of that, which it owns 80% of, it's the iBet Bitcoin ETF, which is held by none other than Coinbase. Yes, you guys all know and love how much I love Coinbase. Obviously, that's sarcastic here, but we're seeing these sovereign wealth funds, institutional investors coming in to Bitcoin ETFs here very rapidly. So we are looking at BlackRock potentially having some of the most influence in the world when it comes to Bitcoin, and Coinbase just quietly potentially rugging them, right? Where we're seeing these things from Abu Dhabi, we're seeing Mumbai, and we're seeing all these other things. But the Bitcoin price action here is pretty interesting, right? We're seeing Bitcoin start to shoot up now on this notice. Allegedly, retail was flocking out of Bitcoin. That's what they were telling us there, right? Retail was flocking out of Bitcoin, but the big money buyers were flocking in. But how does that make any sense? If these big money players are coming into Bitcoin, these guys have a lot more money than retail, right? I mean, it just makes logical sense to know that these big players have massive bags and they're going to be buying in. Look, I know Michael Saylor and his billionaire buddies all around the world are going to be scooping up Bitcoin. But look at these guys, right? $1.7 trillion, $1.3 trillion. Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, right? Like Saudi Arabia, 925 billion, 1 trillion, 1.1 trillion. These guys are going in on Bitcoin. And because they're going in on Bitcoin, we're going to see continually them start to continue to stack. But we are looking at the potential of Coinbase essentially having a huge issue here, right? With Coinbase potentially issuing paper Bitcoin, because that rumor's been floating around for quite some time, right? Is Coinbase issuing this paper Bitcoin to BlackRock and other ETFs? Trust me, bro, absolutely not. But the loudest critics, since September, they've been worried about this. So I personally don't think that these worries are anything to be written off, to be honest with you. I think when there's smoke, there's fire in a lot of these instances. So BlackRock has diversified outside of just Coinbase as the only custodial provider for them. So I think that's just a sign of the writing on the wall here. There's more distrust in Coinbase here than we're all really giving it credit for. So I think that that's going to continue to push along. And I think more of these rumors are going to come up, especially because we have Coinbase with such a large percentage of Bitcoin under their own management. It's the world's largest custodian with 12% of overall Bitcoin in existence under its holding. At least that's according to Wikipedia, quality source here. But I mean, either way, we could go through and do the maths, and I would not doubt that it's pretty close to it, right? We have about $2.5 million or 2.5 million Bitcoin under its management. That includes 8 of the 11 Bitcoin ETFs in the United States, which have over 1 million coins already. So nearly 1 million coins straight just from the ETFs itself. They're custodying some of MicroStrategy's coins as well. I know Fidelity does have some of those, but some of them are held by Coinbase. A lot of these publicly traded companies are also held by Coinbase as well, right? So as we're seeing these big players come on and we see Bitcoin continue to skyrocket in flight here. I know you guys love it when I sing that. As we see that, more Coinbase or more Bitcoin is going to be under Coinbase's custody, which is going to be a huge, huge worry, right? So we've got, Bitcoin as the 8th largest with the $1.846 trillion under as their market cap, excuse me. But we've got a huge worry here. We've got nearly 2.5 million Bitcoin under Coinbase, right? So this is why I always preach self-custody. And I've partnered with the best place to buy Bitcoin, I think, in the United States, because they preach just strictly self-custody. And guess what, folks? They've got free sats for you today. So get your Lightning wallets ready, because I'm going to give you some free sats from my friends over at the Bitcoin Well. But before we give it away, you got to read some of these, folks. You can get free sats for yourself. If you get 3 tokens for every $10 you buy or sell. Set up the recurring buys. Buy $5, $10 worth weekly, daily, what have you. You get 5 Wishing Well tokens every time you do that. Then you get 500. You'll be able to play, right? So you play with these Wishing Well tokens. You can win up to 1 million sats. So every time you buy Bitcoin, they're giving you more and more Bitcoin. And wow, would you look at that? A little funny number we got here, 384 sats. I have not seen that one before. I've been doing this a while, folks, and we usually get 210, but they're mixing it up on us over at the Bitcoin Well. Now, if you didn't get these sats, you could go to bitcoinwell.com/greencandle. It'll look like this. You can go there, sign up today, enter your email, and if you've got a big bag, 50K or more, go scroll on down. Hit this call, book with a specialist, get with them. They got the best white glove service to help you get your Bitcoin off an exchange. And you also need a hardware wallet with all of that. So that's why I've partnered with Bitbox. You could go to bitbox.swiss/greencandle. Everybody in the comments always makes fun of me that I say backslash, but it's just slash, allegedly. Go there, get yourself a Bitbox. I prefer the Bitcoin only edition. Go there. You can get everything you want. A Steel Wallet, Steel Wallet Pro. Hammer it all in. Use promo code GreenCandle at the end of it, and you will get everything you need and more to buy and hold your own Bitcoin, so you don't have to worry about this paper attack that BlackRock and Coinbase are mustering up on us. Because like I've always said, folks, when there's smoke, there is fire, especially in this industry. And I've been neglecting you guys in the chat, so I apologize. Jack here saying keep stacking. TF, BlackRock might be leaving Coinbase because Coinbase doesn't sell BlackRock more ETF than it holds. BlackRock is using a smaller custodian. That is, I actually kind of like that conspiracy theory. We've got the goats in the chat, All Nighter Hider. Smoke that like Cheech and Chong. We got Down Under Blues, Bing Bong, it's on. And the GOAT, good day, McLovin. Great to see you guys all in here. Keep blowing up this chat. Tell me what you guys think of all of this. All of this. You guys think it's warranted? Because I do. I think that although they're saying paranoid Bitcoin investors have become increasingly convinced that dealings between Coinbase and the biggest crypto exchange in America and BlackRock, the largest asset manager, might not be entirely up, right? Because we see, you guys heard it, right? The flows and these ETFs just not adding up too much, right? You can see this screenshot here. I just got a notification that the volume won't work, so I'm not going to play it anymore. But what I'm seeing is these big money managers are now going into Bitcoin because they're looking at shorting the dollar, right? We're seeing Bitcoin start to pump here in April. We're seeing buys go through April that we haven't seen before, right? When you do the work, there's a very short list of assets that mirror the characteristics of gold. Bitcoin is on that short list. Government and financial institutions are increasingly adopting Bitcoin to protect purchasing power and the value of their treasuries in the face of macroeconomic shocks and geopolitical tensions. I mean, would you looky here? And another thing that I've seen is Michael Saylor at his Bitcoin for Corporations Day that they've got going on right now. Saylor's prediction that the IBET Bitcoin ETF will be the biggest in the world in 10 years. So context on this, the largest ETF, S&P 500, has taken 51 billion just this year. IBET's total assets are 54 billion. So in 4 months, the VOO, the first quarter, is taken in 51 billion. IBET 51 total under there, right? Yeah, give the conspiracy 6 months, it becomes the truth. I agree with you. It's unsurprising that we've seen all this, right? I mean, what did we see, right? We saw the Twitter files. We saw all these different things. These conspiracies have always come to true, right? Everybody's always uncovering these things. McLevin says he'd be more surprised if something fishy wasn't going on. And I agree with you. With these big players, right? They want control. There is zero doubt in my mind that they're looking at all these things. They're looking at the amount of Bitcoin. They're looking at how quickly Bitcoin became the 8th largest asset in the world. Look, it even passed silver at one point. And now we're seeing it come down a little bit and silver rise up. But given everything that we've seen, I would not be surprised one bit if we continue to see some fishiness go on, right? Especially with these big guys coming in. Institutions adopting reserve strategies to combat inflation. Look, what are some of the big countries that we've seen? Okay, look, I'm saying big in quotes, right? We had the Kingdom of Bhutan who's been stacking in the background. What is the only reason we know the Kingdom of Bhutan had Bitcoin or crypto exposure? Well, the bankruptcy filings from BlockFi and Celsius had the Kingdom of Bhutan in there, right? So there's a lot of things going on in the background that we just quite frankly have no idea about, right? But then we hear these rumors. We hear what's going on. You know, why is everybody, quote, paranoid to think that Coinbase is doing that? There's a flood of capital in the new Bitcoin ETFs. It's pushed the Bitcoin price to new all-time high just 2 months after the ETFs were passed. And you hear it, right? Retail is driving the price down. The big money players are buying now. What kind of sense does that make? I'll tell you what, it doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense because the big players have a lot more money than retail. It's just plain and simple, right? What do these big economic factors look at? These guys want to see the big money players come in. They want to see nation states. That's what they want to see to pump their bags, right? So Coinbase has served as a custodian for most of these Bitcoin ETFs, and there's instead merely issuing IOUs or, quote, paper Bitcoin, these critics say. They're unsustained rumors. Yeah. But so unsustained that Brian Armstrong addressed these rumors on his Twitter account, or X. So where there's smoke, there's fire. If you're giving these rumors any light of day, it makes me think that, you know, there is some issue here, right? Anyway, we are seeing massive amounts of institutional players start to come in, and they're all doing it to combat inflation, right? So I think the big takeaway here is that everybody is looking at Bitcoin to short the dollar in a sense, right? They're seeing the tariffs. They're seeing everything from coming in from everywhere else. And they're saying, hey, we need to be keeping a close eye on these tariffs, on what everything is announcing. Saylor announced that over 13,000 institutions have direct exposure to a strategy, which is an estimated 55 million beneficiaries to have indirect exposure to Bitcoin. 13,000 institutions. Look, maybe a little over 100 have Bitcoin exposure directly on their balance sheet, but 13,000 have that. I mean, that's absolutely insane. Bitcoin recently surpassed Google in market cap, making Bitcoin one of the top 5 assets in the world. Maybe I'm understating it. Look at this. They're saying Bitcoin has now entered the top 5 largest assets in the world. Well, would you look at that? According to this article here today, we're looking at Bitcoin as the 5th largest asset in the world. So I imagine that's going to continue to rise up here, folks. And we're going to continue to see this absolutely take off. And I had a great conversation with the one and only, the world famous Bitstein about BlackRock and Bitcoin. So go to the channel and check that out here. After, of course, you smoke that like Cheech and Chong, you hit the subscribe button, you tell a friend to tell a friend. And if you guys don't want to sit through that full interview just yet, I also am going to be going live here in my Macro Insights channel very soon in the next 10 or so minutes. So if you guys want to come to that first and then go watch the interview, I'm going to be telling everything about what is going on with banks and why you guys should be watching that. So thank you guys all for coming out, and see you guys either very shortly or at the next one.